Good morning and welcome to all of you guys here, all those watching online. For those who are wondering what happened to Pastor Dwayne, he shrunk and shaved his head. No, he is in Three Rivers preaching at a church there, one of our affiliates at Riverside Church for Paul Bucco. And I get to share with you guys today. I'm Pastor Daniel Vanderklok and I'm excited. But before I dive into the message this morning, I wanted to mention they kind of ended that video talking about the election that's coming up. As Christians, we are commissioned to be representatives of Jesus, which means what we do is not meant to be a reflection of how we feel, what we like, or what culture says. We are called to go, what does God say? And I'm gonna be a window into that. I'm gonna be the hands and the feet of Jesus, letting Jesus' will be done on earth as it is in heaven. So it changes the issue from how is it worded, what do they like, to God, what do you say? On that note, Exodus 23:7 says, keep yourself from a false matter. Do not kill the innocent and righteous, for I will not justify the wicked. Proverbs tells us that God hates those who shed innocent blood. In Psalms 139, verse 13, it says, for you created me in my inmost being, you knit me together in my mother's womb. Over and over throughout Scripture, God says, I have a heart for those that are defenseless. He says that I make them in the womb. In Jeremiah 1, he goes through, not only does he say he makes them, but he goes, before you were even born, I had a plan for your life. And so as we get ready to vote, I want to invite you, I want to challenge you. Vote for Jesus. All right, so now I get to start my message. So I'm excited because today's topic, I think, is really, really important. And I think it's affecting a ton of people in here. And if it doesn't affect you, it may affect you later. And if it doesn't, I promise you that you love somebody who is affected by either fear, worry, or anxiety. It's a massive topic. And then it does seem to get highlighted about this time of year as a bunch of people decide that they want to go be petrified. But, so it's amazing. But the thing is, when we think about this, a lot of times we write it off and we go, well, kids have irrational fears. And we get this and we're like, you know what? My kid freaks out in the dark. And we're like, this is this fear that my kid won't go to the basement when I ask him to get something because the room is dark. He doesn't want to walk across the dark basement. But then we deal with things and we don't realize the scope that fear, anxiety, and worry can have. And I try to list all three because sometimes we don't realize that they're all connected. And we see here and go, yeah, that guy's got a fear problem. No, I just worry a lot. That's like his apple tree is bigger than mine. So, still a tree. It's still the same thing. And we can get on this, but fear will rob us. Fear can be this massive thing that just stops you from going to the basement. Fear can be this thing that drives your decisions. Fear can be this thing that leaves your body responding like you're having a heart attack and takes you to the hospital. And these are all along the spectrum of it, but so often we just write it off and then we go, well, it's not a big deal, or hey, this is such a big deal that I'm just gonna do whatever the doctor says. And we just totally divide this thing into two sides and try to neglect both sides. But fear and anxiety disorders, statistics say just over 18% of adults in America are dealing with it currently. They say that over 33% of Americans will, but the researchers say that's bogus. It's way higher than that. Most people who are struggling with it won't go to get help unless they end up in the hospital. And so they're struggling, but it's not recorded. And they go, it's at least half, if not far more. It's like, well, okay, if this is a big issue culturally, does the Bible have much to say? Because it's a good spot to start. And 327 times it says to fear not, and then another 186 times it says, do not be afraid. So he begins to address this issue all throughout the Bible. And as I got looking at this and the different effects, it's amazing how wide and how broad this can be and how much it can rob people. And sometimes we don't realize how much fear is limiting us and robbing us from where God has called us to be. I was just talking to a friend just the other day, and he said, there was a spot that I was supposed to go. God called me to go on a trip that was gonna further my walk with God, and it was gonna be amazing. He goes, but as it got close, I literally started having panic attacks. Like breathing issues and all this different stuff. And he's going through it going, this is where I'm supposed to go, but this is what was hitting. But he goes, but I knew it was the enemy. I knew that's where I was supposed to go. And this was the devil trying to stop me. And we may get more into his story, but this idea that God has a call on you and that fear will try to rob you. Fear will try to rob you in your marriage. Fear will try to rob you in your relationship with your children. Fear will try to rob you in your call at work. And it's not even like, yes, it will rob you in the spiritual things, but it will rob you in the physical things. I just talked to a nurse the other day. So I got this like laid on my heart 2 weeks ago. And I wrote most of the sermon on 2 sticky notes. And I scribbled it out in my office. I stuck them to, actually my wife's picture that's right there. I'm like, all right, stick these, that's gonna be a sermon and went back to things. And then that night, and the next day, we went to Post Family Farms, and I saw somebody that I knew, and I was like, hey, how are you? I haven't talked to you in a long time. It's amazing how God can work things out. And they're like, I'm doing great, but I've been really struggling with some fear. Like, you normally don't just walk up to somebody, hey, it's been a long time, here's my issue. But God was on the move. God's like, hey, this is where she's at. This is what's going on. She's a nurse, and she deals with people in extreme circumstances. And somehow, somewhere along the line, fear had been picked up where she was picking up their worry and their anxiety over the procedures that were about to occur and what life would look like after the procedures, to the point that it was affecting her mentally, physically, where her body was responding, even though she was not in any physical danger, her body was responding as if she was in great physical danger. And when she started talking about how much of a problem this was and that she was trying to figure out if she could keep continuing her course of employment because of this, she said, I talked to some of the other nurses on the floor and most of them are dealing with it. And it just blew me away because somehow there's this mass issue that tends to get ignored or belittled. And I thought, why is this? And then what does the Bible say and how do we handle this? And I think that there's been an issue that happens all around the world. It's not just a church issue, but when we're taking things on, we look at a problem, we have a tendency to do a one size fits all. It's just not the case. Has anyone ever had a problem where their car wouldn't start? Anyone ever have that? Okay, when this occurs, if you tell your friend, hey, my car won't start, they probably have the answer. Now, they're gonna view the answer probably through whatever the last issue was that they had where their car wouldn't start. And so they're gonna look at you and go, oh, your car won't start? No worries, it's the battery. You need to charge the battery, maybe you need to replace the battery. Another guy's going, no, the reason your battery died is it's your alternator. It's toast. The other guy's like, no, man, it's the starter. That's why it won't work. And someone else is like, no, man, if you check the fuses, I bet it's the fuse. Do you know, any of them could be right. But the problem isn't that they go, hey, have you checked the battery? The problem is when we go, the only answer for a car not starting is the battery. The only answer is the fuse. You don't have to be real smart to look at that and go, well, all of those could be the case. But if I just go, everybody who has a non-starting car, it's a battery issue, then a lot of people's cars are never gonna start. But we do that with so many other issues. And this is among them, with fear. Where so often there are different roots of fear, different things that cause these issues, but it's very easy to go, hey, you know what? The one that I dealt with is X. Therefore, that's your issue if you're dealing with fear. And so today, I want to take a little bit of time to look at 3 roots or 3 categories of roots of fear. We're going to look at spirit, we're going to look at your mind, and we're going to look at your body. But we're going to go through it kind of backwards because I am most excited about the one that I have personal experience with, and I want to end with it. So be straightforward, and I'm going to be honest about that. But we're going to start with fear that's root is in the mind. 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 5 says, casting down arguments and every high thought that exalts itself against the knowledge of God, bringing every thought into captivity into the obedience of Christ. Our mind is incredibly powerful. What we think about has repercussions. Where we focus produces something. The fruit of a focus on negative possibilities or challenges is worry and anxiety. One of the most basic roots is that if I will let my mind go on to these negative possibilities and just meditate on all that could go wrong, might go wrong, or how these challenges, how I don't know. And I have watched people take this and refuse to come out of it. I watched somebody that I will name Sue. That's not the name her parents gave her, but Sue had a problem. And I watched her talk herself in a circle until she thought she almost had an answer and quick bypass the answer to go, yeah, but what if, and jump back into her circle of anxiety. And then she goes, I have such bad anxiety. I'm like, how could you not have such bad anxiety? If you are going to circle every possible option for a negative outcome, and we see this not just today, this has been an issue for thousands of years. Elijah in the Bible, in 1 Kings chapter 18 into 19, he has had like an amazing day. Like if you don't know Elijah, he was a prophet in the Old Testament. And God told him to prophesy again. This king was leading the nation into wickedness. And he goes, hey, it won't rain until I say so. And then he goes and hides. For 3 years, no rain. That creates massive issues. After 3 years, he comes out of hiding and the king's been hunting him. And he shows up and he goes, hey, go find the king. Tell him to meet me on top of the mountain. Gather the people. We're going to have a showdown. And they show up. And he goes through and goes, all right, people, how long are you going to waver between 2 opinions? If God's God, serve him. If Baal's God, serve him. And they're all just like, what's going on? Watching the show. And he goes, we're going to have a showdown. Me versus all the prophets of Baal. We're both going to set up a sacrifice and we're going to pray. And whatever God answers with fire, that one's God. And all the people were like, sweet, that sounds cool. Fire from heaven. This is epic. So they gather around, he prays. This is the very short version of the story. So if you want more of the story, 1 Kings chapter 18 and 19. So he goes through, he prays, fire comes down from heaven. After God answers with fire from heaven, they destroy a bunch of these prophets of Baal. He prays and a cloud shows up where it's about to rain. It hasn't rained for 3 years. He tells the king on his chariot, you better race before the rain overtakes you. He takes off on his chariot. Elijah, filled with the Spirit of God, outruns him for like 18 miles. He outruns the king's horses. Like, this is nuts. God is like moving on him. But the king Ahab makes it back, tells his wife, who is this wicked woman, about what happened, and her response was to send a message and say, may God do to me and ever more if by this time tomorrow I don't make you like one of those dead prophets. So he has had like this amazing high of wins, but he gets this negative word spoken over him in his future. And in chapter 19, verse 3, I'm going to read it from the New King James. And when he saw that, he arose and ran for his life. And when he saw that, and some of the translations go, and he was greatly afraid. But when I look at these two different ways of translating it, when he saw that, he ran, and he became greatly afraid. How many times do we hear something, see it, and be filled with fear? How many times do we get a report? And maybe it's a report from a doctor that's scary. Maybe it's a report that there's going to be a merger at work. Maybe it's just, hey, you know what? They're going to cut back a third of the workforce. There's so many things that can come at us that can be spoken that we can see. And there's these lies, and sometimes it's outright spoken over your life. I love doctors. I just don't ever want to see them at work. But in our present society, in our culture and its sue-happy nature, doctors have become professional pessimists. And some of them really aren't that way by nature, but as a practice to prevent and to cover themselves, their liability, they will paint for you the worst possible scenario. That way, if that happens, you can't say they didn't warn you. And then if not, then they did better than what you thought and they look good. And it's the way that our world has made it. But it's so bad because you sit here and you're like, what could it be? And they're like, well, it could be a headache, or you could have a tumor in your head and you might die. And you're like, what just happened? Like, we should probably run some tests. And you're like, how did it just escalate that far? But that little maybe all of a sudden can spark a picture that's a promise from the enemy that fills us with fear, anxiety, and worry. In 1 Samuel chapter 17, there's a little bit of a different picture. See, it's the story of David and Goliath. And if you've been in church, you've heard the story before. If you haven't been in church, you've heard reference to David and Goliath. The little guy and the big guy. That might be all you know, but nonetheless, you've probably heard that much. But in Israel, there was this war between the Israelites and the Philistines. And the Philistines had this giant of a warrior. He was 6 cubits in a span, and since that's weird to you, 9'9". That's big. That is really big. If he stood on his tiptoes, he would hit his head on the basketball rim. That's big. And so he comes out, and this is before everyone had guns. Because when you have guns, the fact that someone outweighs you by 600 pounds stops mattering. You're like, boom. But when you're doing this with swords and the guy is double your size, it's a big problem. And so he comes out and he begins to challenge the Israelites. And he goes, hey, send me a man that he may fight with me. And if he wins, then we'll be your slaves. But if I win, if I kill him, we're going to make all of you slaves. And when he said this, all of the Israelites became afraid. The giant came out. The giant made a promise. They believed the promise and they freaked out. Except one little boy. Which is really strange that it's not the person who you'd think would be brave. Because if you read around through 1 Samuel, you'll discover that the king of the Israelites was head and shoulders taller than everybody else. So I don't know exactly how tall everybody else was, and so how tall he was, but he was a big guy. You would think, hey, you have the best weaponry, you have the best armor, you're the biggest, you should be the one who'd go, you know what, we got this. But his response was, if anybody will fight him, I will pay them. No taxes for life, for you and for your family. Maybe you'll go like, shove your brother out there. Like, he starts upping the ante, trying to get somebody to fight him. But for 40 days, this Philistine comes out and taunts the Israelites. But when David shows up, David, this little shepherd boy who came to check on his brothers because David wasn't even part of the army, David shows up and he goes, what's this guy doing? Why does he challenge our God? What's going to happen for the guy who fights him? And the other people are like, what? Like, well, yeah, he's going to get no taxes. He's going to get loads of money. He gets to marry the king's daughter. He's going through this. And he's like, say what? And his brothers like challenges him. But he goes and he stands before the king. And this is where it becomes relevant to us. The king looks at him and goes, you can't. You're just a kid. He's been a soldier since he was a kid. And the king furthers this picture that if you do this, you're going to die. But David's response, this is 1 Samuel 17, 36 through 37. Your servant has struck down both lions and bears. This uncircumcised Philistine shall be like one of them, for he has defied the armies of the living God. And the Lord will deliver me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear, will deliver me from the hand of the Philistine. And Saul said to David, go, and the Lord be with you. Now, when he talked about the uncircumcised Philistine, he wasn't being rude or making some off sexual comment. That was the sign of the covenant. He goes, that man does not have a relationship with my God. That threat is against my God, and my God is with me, and so that threat will not stand. And his hope was different. He took and laid hold of the promises of God. And as we go through life, there's a lot of things that may make promises that they're going to destroy you, that they're going to take you out, that they're going to be the end of your children, that they're going to be the end of your relationships, that they're going to be the end of your career, that God could never use you. And you get to decide, am I going to stand here while that opposition comes at me, and am I going to take that, or am I going to lay hold of God's promises that says that by his stripes I am healed, that says that no weapon formed against me shall prosper, that the children of the Lord are taught, the children of the righteous are taught by the Lord, that God directs my steps. Am I going to lay hold of his promises, or am I going to lay hold of the promises of the enemy? Am I going to lay hold of the promises of the diagnosis, or am I going to lay hold of the promises of the healer? I have a choice. But what promises I lay hold of will determine what fruit grows in my life. And if I lay hold of the promises of the enemy, fear will fill me. Anxiety will control me, and they will limit me. And as I continue, there are so many promises, and if we'll lay hold of them, it changes everything. But I kind of divided this going, one of the other causes in the mind, the root in the mind of fear is when I place all of my hope and my trust in something other than Jesus. See, in 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 6 and 7, it says, therefore, humble yourselves under the mighty hand of God, that he may exalt you in due time, casting all your care upon him, for he cares for you. Humbling yourself looks like casting your cares. When I put the cares and the responsibility and the weight on me and my own ability, I am putting too much weight on me. I cannot handle that weight, and in the end, it will crush me and fill me with worry, anxiety, and fear. I was gonna say a few years ago, a lot of years ago. You put up the first picture. I went on a hike in Australia. That picture, it's too far out. You can't see how incredibly long and crazy my hair was there, but I used to have hair. So I'm hiking, and there's these beautiful waterfalls. And I decided that a picture on top of the waterfall would be really cool. And I found a little spot where I could climb to get up there. However, there's like this little ledge, and across this little ledge, it's not like a waterfall, it's like a water drip that goes across it. Can you put up that next picture? I don't know if you can, how well you can see it, but there's water coming down there in the middle, and there's a ledge up there. I'm like, I'm gonna walk across this ledge, but I'm aware that wet rocks become slippery rocks, right? So there was going to be a challenge or an adversity in between me and my goal. I'm like, no worries. I grabbed onto a little something growing out of the side of the rocks. Really what I just did is I just placed my trust in this little something growing out of the rocks because I knew that there was a hazard in this water. So I grab a hold of those, I go to step across this, and I was right, it was slippery. I was wrong, the thing I grabbed onto was not very strong. Next picture, I'm all wet. I went and bounced down that waterfall and slid all the way down to the bottom of that section. I didn't get too scraped up, but here's my point. What you put your trust in determines what shakes you. And when my trust is in me, then that's a lot of pressure, and it's easy to get toppled. And then that begins to fill me with this anxiety and worry. And when I say that, I can't tell you how many people have looked at me and said, so you're telling me that I just have to deny my circumstances and that faith is denial? No. I had a conversation, was it Friday we went and looked at the planes? Oh, so I think it was, there's a spot where you can take your kids and go sit by the airport and watch planes take off, which made kids happy. So we went, so it was cool. And sunset was beautiful. But we're watching these planes, and somebody commented about how amazing it is that this massive, heavy thing of metal carries us through the sky. And you go, have they not heard of gravity? Isn't gravity real? Is the plane in denial of gravity? No, it's not. It is not denying gravity and the reality of it. It is recognizing the power of thrust and lift to overcome gravity. When we go through things in life, it's not a matter of sitting here going, I'm denying that there was a diagnosis from the doctor. I am denying that there could be problems at work. It's not denying. It's going, you know what? Yes, there's problems at work. Yes, the doctor saw something that shouldn't have been there, but my God is bigger and his word is more powerful, and I'm going to stand on that, not on my circumstances. And it becomes such a powerful thing. Isaiah says this, it says, fear not, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. Yes, I will help you. I will uphold you by my righteous right hand. In Philippians, it says to be anxious about nothing, but in everything with prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, let your requests be known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses understanding, will guard your hearts. He goes, if you will take your requests to God, not with complaining, but with thanksgiving, with recognizing him, with recognizing his promises, you can be filled with his peace. But a lot of times we sit here and go, I'm going to pray about it. God, I can't believe it. I got such a bad diagnosis. I'm going to die. I don't feel better. You just complained looking at the sky. But he goes, if you'll take it and go, God, the report from the doctor did not look good. But God, you said that your name is above every name. You said to lay your hands on the sick and that they shall recover. God, you are my healer and my redeemer. You said no weapon formed against me shall prosper. You said I'm redeemed from the curse and that every sickness is a part of the curse. God, I stand on your word, and your word says that I don't have to stay sick. Your word says that I'm healed. Whatever this diagnosis, I command you to leave in Jesus' name. By his stripes, I am healed. When we do that, it changes something inside of us. And fear and anxiety don't need to cripple us. They don't need to control us. And I have made it through one of the routes. We're going to have to go a little faster. But physically, sometimes, especially when things are internal, we can forget that the physical plays a role in it. Sometimes anxiety can literally be a physical physical issue. Years ago, my wife, while pregnant, started dealing with a bunch of like fear and anxiety. And it showed up first when the kids climbed on her. And then she felt like she couldn't breathe. Turns out there was fluid in her lungs and she was having trouble breathing. And so it was a logical thing that her body was doing as a mechanism to get her to move, to help her breathe and stay alive. Good things. I like my wife. After pregnancy, after the lungs were healed up, she started to continued having, here's her words. She said, but after that healed up, it started happening again where I would randomly get anxiety for no reason. I didn't have any negative thoughts. So I just prayed against it like it was a sickness. But I hated the feeling of dread and danger and tightness in my chest. The Lord led me to start taking whole food vitamins, and after a few weeks, all the anxiety was gone and didn't return. Sometimes you're not broken, you're empty. And one of the things that we've struggled on as a New Testament church, in the Bible, in Matthew chapter 2, verse 27, there's this episode happening between the Pharisees and Jesus. And Jesus says, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. And he goes through this, and if I don't have time to get all through the theology of the Sabbath, but here's what I want you to catch. We are not justified or made right with God by doing nothing on Saturday. But the Sabbath, because they made the Sabbath more work than not doing work. When you're sitting here and you're like, you can't turn on a light switch because it fires up a spark. You're like, do you realize it's harder to walk around in the dark? But here's the thing. The Sabbath was made for man. Rest was made for people. Some people are dealing with fear and anxiety because they have been going at full steam and their adrenals are literally empty. They're going so hard that their body physically is responding and running on empty. And what they actually need is to go to bed and eat something healthy. And sometimes it's our Band-Aids that further our problem, where we sit here and we go, I feel so lousy, I'm gonna come home, turn on the TV and eat junk food, but the TV is gonna keep me up later than I should have been, so I'm still not getting enough sleep, so I'm not recovering, and my body still feels drained the next day. Sometimes it's a physical, you need, counselors will say, they'll say, check, halt. Are you hungry, angry, lonely, or tired? There can be literal, physically empty. But I wanted to make sure I had enough time for the spiritual. 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 7 says, for God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind. In Romans chapter 8, verse 15, it says, you did not receive the spirit of bondage again to fear, but you received the spirit of adoption to whom we cry, Abba, Father. Fear, there is a natural fear. There's a drained anxiety. There's the fruit of negative focus. But there is a spirit of fear. And there are far more people that are affected by it than realize it. When I was, anywhere from like 11 to 15 years old, my dad used to travel and preach at different churches every Wednesday night. And he didn't like to go, he didn't go places alone, doesn't go places alone, both because for accountability, prevent anyone from being able to say anything, and he can pour into people. So he said, you know what, hey, I'm gonna take you with me everywhere that I go on a Wednesday night for years. And he taught on fear. But he would teach that message, it was a great message, in all these different churches. So I probably heard that message in 50 different churches with him. And he talked about how his life, he didn't realize that his life had been controlled by fear for years. It wasn't until he crashed a plane and didn't want to fly again, and God said, you need to, and he goes, I don't want to, and God goes, and I think some people walk up, you're gonna be afraid. He's like, gonna be afraid? And God's like, you've been dealing with a spirit of fear. It's like, since when? 2nd grade. Boom, and God just showed him, and then showed him time after time after time after time, where God had called him, where opportunities had been there, and he had bailed because of fear. Fear of failure had controlled him for 20 years. And he shared that, and I was like, wow, that's cool. So glad my dad got free. Did not connect the dots. I went to Bible school, and it was on my heart that God had made me to communicate. Like, the speaking to people was part of why God made me. But there was this problem. I loved talking to somebody one-on-one, but I was afraid to speak, not just like in front of a large audience, but like to speak up in class, to lead a small group. Like, my stomach would try to crawl out my throat. Kind of an issue. Well, my professor started talking about how he got set free from a spirit of fear that tried to rob him of God's call on his life. And when he said that, all of a sudden, like those 50 times I'd heard my dad preach this, like all of a sudden came back up, and it was like, dum, 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 dum. Maybe the thing that's crippling you is a spirit of fear. I'm like, wow. Mind blown. So that evening we had small group, and I went to Tim, who's now my brother-in-law. I said, hey, Tim, remember that spirit of fear that Robert was talking about? He's like, yeah. I think I might have one of those. He's like, really? Like, yeah. Like, will you pray for me? He's like, sure. So he lays his hands on me, and he prayed for me. And you know what I felt? Nothing. Which was kind of disappointing. You really wanted like this like wave of like hot is coming over me, or like chills or something. Tingles even, but no, nothing. But shortly thereafter, I came home for their summer break, our winter break. And when I got home, my dad's like, hey, welcome home. You're preaching in Bay City on Wednesday. I'm like, I am? He's like, yeah. I'm like, to the youth group, to the church? He goes, I don't know. You better call the pastor. I'm like, well, thank you. But I went to speak, and it was crazy, because fear, like stomach, like ball up and try to crawl out your throat, had been an issue. But when I went to speak, there was nervous, like, hey, this is something new, a little bit of butterflies, but that like life controlling and limiting fear was broken. And all of a sudden, it all began to click. I have seen so many people set free from fear that didn't realize it was a spirit of fear that was limiting them. Whether it was kids at camp who were going, hey, I deal with night terrors on a regular basis, and seeing the night terrors stop. People going, hey, I feel like I'm called to do this, but I can't be in front of people, and praying for them and seeing them set free. Seeing my wife, who was afraid of heights, but like there's wisely afraid of heights. If you look off of the edge of something really tall, your stomach should drop. Like that's just supposed to keep you alive. But there's a point where it becomes ridiculous. She was at that point. But she wanted to help me, and I had to re-roof our house. And on the roof, she recognized that this is ridiculous. There's a section of our roof that's not very steep, and she was on that, not right next to the edge, and she was like clinging to the roof. I'm like, can you hand me a shingle? And like petrified, realized that this could be a spirit of fear, and prayed. And then I needed another shingle. Hey, can you get me a shingle? Yeah. She handed me the shingle. And she's like, wait a second. I just handed him a shingle. Like, I don't want to like jump off the edge, but the controlling, gripping fear was gone. I think that there are some people in here this morning who need to be set free from fear. And as I look, some of you go, well, which one's mine? Which route? If your car won't start, tell you, check the battery, check the fuse, start with the things that are cheap, and then work your way up. If you're dealing with fear, check a route. If that route isn't it, check the next one. Check the next one. The band's coming up. If you say, hey, I want to be set free from fear. I don't want anxiety and worry to control me any longer. We've got a team coming up. The band's going to start to play a song. We're going to sing if you're in your seat. But if you say, hey, I want to be free from anxiety, fear, and worry, we're going to lay hands on you. And just like I got set free, people are going to get set free this morning. So you guys can, band's coming up, so you guys can all stand up. But if you want to be free from fear, anxiety, or worry, come on down to the front. We're going to lay hands on people, and people are going to be set free. Because it's powerful. If you're watching online, there's a whole team there that want to pray for you as well. Because if I look through the word, Jesus tells us, he says, heal the sick, cleanse lepers, raise the dead, and cast out demons. Freely you have received, freely give. He gave us authority. In Matthew 28, he said, all authority in heaven and earth has been given to me. Go, therefore. And so we're going to see people set free. They're go ahead and just line them up. They're lining up. There's a prayer team that's going to join me. I'm going to step down a second and pray with them. But it's a powerful thing. And I don't want someone leaving here in bondage. And if you don't know my Jesus, I want to give you an opportunity to meet him here in just a minute. But I want to pray for some people because the people are going to be free this morning. And if you feel nothing, that's okay. I felt nothing. Except where fear was supposed to be, it was gone.
There is power in the name of Jesus. There is power in the name of Jesus. There is power in the name of Jesus to break every chain, break every chain, break every chain. There is power in the name of Jesus. There is power in the name of Jesus. There is power in the name of Jesus to break every chain, break every chain, break every chain, break every chain, to break every chain, break every chain, break every, to break every chain, to break every chain, break every chain, break every chain. All sufficient sacrifice, so freely given, such a price, but I every chain, break every chain, break every chain. There is power in the name of Jesus. There is power in the name of Jesus. There is power in the name of Jesus. Break every chain, break every chain, break every chain, to break every chain, to break every
I love seeing people set free. God has such good plans for us. His love is so good. And we're seeing people set free from fear. But if you don't know Jesus, if you have not received his forgiveness, you may know a lot about him, but if you aren't living for him, if you don't know that you're right with him, I want to give you an opportunity today to experience freedom, to know him, and to know that you're right with him. Can everyone bow their heads and close their eyes? If you say, today, I need to know that I'm right with him. I want his forgiveness. When I say 3, I want you to raise your hand. 1, get ready. 2, 3. Go ahead and raise up your hand. If you're online, you can go ahead and type in, that's me. Go ahead and raise your hand. Say, that's me. I want to know Jesus. I want to know that I'm right with God and on my way to heaven. Up top, who else? Another one in the back. Who else? Says, that's me. Another one over here. Awesome. Who else is this? That's me. I want to be right with God. I want to know his forgiveness. All right. We're going to say a simple prayer. And the Bible says whoever calls on his name will be saved. We get to respond to his invitation. So whether you raised your hand or you've done this before, I want to ask you to join me. Say, God, thank you for loving me, even when I make mistakes. I'm sorry for my sins. I believe that you died and rose again. I choose to live for you from this day forward. I declare that you are my Lord. In Jesus' name, amen. Awesome. Give them a really big hand.